Hey there, how's everyone doing today? My name is Britni Johnson and I'm streaming live from Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And hopefully, since I'm not the most tech savvy person out there, things are working appropriately on the reverse side of this for all that may be joining in with us today. I would love to get maybe a thumbs up from Mackenzie just to verify that things are streaming appropriately before we get going with introductions and such. Okay, so I'm told to swipe left. There we go. Despite apparently being lumped in with the classification of millennials, I really don't identify very much with that. And I have a very love-hate relationship with technology, so bear with me if we're having any sort of issues on the other side. Mackenzie, are you able to just verify that everything is looking good on your end? Also, I'm just going to put it out there. I'm probably feeling a very similar sentiment to some of the other featured live speakers that have kind of graced NTA's Facebook Live events in the past couple days or weeks. This is my first time using this format, so definitely feeling a little nervous, and hopefully that will slowly subside here as we kind of move along with things and get into some momentum with our discussion today. Still waiting to hear if things are good. I see that I have a few viewers, but I'm not seeing any indication of feedback yet from the audience. Okay, great. So, wonderful. Okay, so let me, I guess, begin by, again, my name is Britni Johnson. I was asked on behalf of the Nutritional Therapy Association to speak at their upcoming Fall Denver Summit that they're hosting on October 21st. And so today is kind of just a little precursor to my background, and I guess I'm just here to more or less share my story in leading up to what I'm going to be talking about in October with them and some of the other speakers. Again, I'm streaming live from Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Some of you may know where that's located. For those that don't, I'm about 2.5 to 3 hours northwest of Denver in a small mountain town. As you can see behind me, that is Mount Werner. That is the top of Steamboat ski area. So we are a ski resort town, affectionately known by some as Ski Town USA, but we also represent so much more than just skiing. As you can see, we have a lovely bluebird summer day up here. We're very fortunate with some of the weather patterns that we have, also challenged by a lot of that as well. But in addition to being known for our ski heritage, we have actually a very long-standing agricultural and ranching legacy as well, which kind of ties in beautifully with some of the things that I'm involved in doing up here. So with that, again, thank you, NTA, for kind of hosting this and putting this all together. I feel really honored to be able to be a part of this whole process, and look forward to kind of sharing some of my story with people who might be interested in my background. So with that, I guess I'm just going to kind of go into who I am and what I do, and hopefully not blabble too much. And if at any point, if I'm speaking too quickly, which I know I'm just like hearing my grandmother in the back of my brain right now, you speak too fast, please just don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll try and slow things down, since I'm sure part of that is also nerves. So with that, so if you had asked me 10 years ago where I saw myself currently today, 10 years from that point, there's absolutely no way that I could have ever foreseen the path that I would land on. It has truly been quite a journey. I'm originally from the Chicagoland area. I did not grow up a skier, so I kind of happened upon Steamboat serendipitously following graduation from Michigan State in 2008. I actually studied international relations and had aspirations to go into the Peace Corps and work in foreign service. And I was in Washington, D.C. following a semester there, working for a former ambassador at a think tank. Had a great experience, and yet that was right when Obama was first taking office, and so there was a changing of that political climate, on top of the fact that that was also when the economy really started to tank. And so from a job standpoint, there really weren't that many opportunities, and I really am not the type of person who's very patient to wait around for those things. I'm very much a go-getter, a doer, and so I didn't really care to twiddle my thumbs and hope that something was going to work out there. So I kind of picked up my bags and decided to do some international travel, which was, I should say, a theme in my early to mid 20s. And it was through that process that I guess I should back up briefly. The summer before I had been in Washington, D.C., I had just happened upon a summer job working for a trail crew that was based out of Steamboat Springs. And so at that point, although I was studying what I was studying at Michigan State in a completely unrelated, non-agricultural or environmental field, I very much had some sort of an internal drive and pull to want to be outdoors and explore that side of my personality more. And so through a friend contact, I had a job based out of Steamboat Springs in summer of 2008 that put Steamboat on the map for me. But like I said, aside from that, I had no other gravitational pull towards the West and Colorado. And so upon kind of changing gears after graduating and realizing that I perhaps wanted to go down a different path, I had a job lined up in Alaska, and a few days before I was actually supposed to head up there, I just had a gut feeling that it was not the right place, the right time for that experience. And I came running back to Colorado, and I had held another position with that youth corps that summer and fall. And then that kind of naturally transitioned into a year-long AmeriCorps Vista position with that nonprofit here in town. And by that point, I was pretty hooked on the lifestyle, the mountain town. I spent that first season completely flopping through learning how to ski powder, and yet had the time of my life with my friends who kind of took me under their wing and showed me the ropes. And I will admit that my athletic background lent itself well to picking that up fairly quickly. As it was just a few years later, I guess it was after my third season, was when I ultimately ended up taking a more seasonally permanent position that I'll get to in just a moment here in Steamboat, that has kind of solidified where I am today and why I am here. But leading up to that, I've held a number of different seasonal employment opportunities. As many people will tell you in mountain towns, the hustle is very real, and many people are juggling 2 to 3 jobs to be able to afford the lifestyle that this beautiful place provides us all with. So I was fortunate to kind of be able to link some things together while figuring out what exactly my passions and my path were. And so that kind of lent itself to reflecting back to a time in college where, when I was studying abroad in India, I was with a woman who worked at the Michigan State Student Organic Farm. And so at that point, that would have been in 2007, and I apologize that I'm kind of jumping around this time frame. Hopefully you're able to follow all right. But while I was studying abroad in a very small group that was quite intense based on location, experience, time in my life, all of those things, I had some very deep, profound conversations with this woman about our agricultural systems here in the United States. And it really left an indelible mark on just who I am. I really identified with that. I was completely blown away by the impact that conventional system was truly having on not only our environment, but on our individual communities and our food systems at large, both, again, in a family sense, but also in the greater contextual sense of society. And so at that point, I started to just voraciously read various things and kind of went down that rabbit hole and made a vow to myself that at some point I wanted to go and work on a farm. At that point in my studies, it did not make sense to kind of restructure what I was studying. I was too far along. At this point, I wish that I could have potentially had some sort of a formal background there, but nonetheless, I didn't. And the opportunity to pursue that really didn't present itself until after I had been in Steamboat for a few years. I finally felt in 2012 that it was the right time for me to kind of go after that. And so I ended up landing a farm apprenticeship up in Bozeman, Montana with Gallatin Valley Botanicals. They are a 12-acre, or at the time they were, I'm not sure how much has changed in the last 4 or 5 years since I was there, but at that point they were a 12-acre diversified CSA-based community-supported agriculture farm. So 12 acres sounds pretty small, but when you're doing everything by hand, we had a staff of so there was a husband-wife farmer team, and then there were 4 apprentices, 1 like head farm apprentice, and then we had a couple of additional weekly staff that came in to help with the harvest days. So we were kind of operating with 10 or 11 people on our big days, which is still a lot of ground to cover when you're doing everything by hand. So it was a very positive experience. I was up there from about mid-April until the end of October. One of the hardest experiences that I've ever been challenged with, which is saying a bit because of just the lifestyle that I generally have reflected. It was one of those things that at the end of the season, it solidified my passion for wanting to pursue agriculture on some sort of a community level, from not only that personal drive, but from wanting to have an impact in whatever community I landed in. And knowing that I felt as strongly as I did about just our food system in general, it seems like the natural path to try and continue to pursue. But at that same time, I also recognized that if I was going to work that hard, I wanted it to kind of be on my own terms. And so that kind of lent itself to reflecting on what that next step was going to be. And while I was in Montana, so a couple things were happening. At that point, I felt that I was maybe ready to move on from Steamboat and completely open to wherever this journey was going to lead me. And so when I had moved up there, I didn't necessarily have any intention of going back down to Colorado, and yet the universe works in mysterious ways. And I had been approached by a friend back here in Steamboat after shortly moving up to Montana about a backcountry ski guide opportunity here in Steamboat with Steamboat Powder Cats, that they would be hiring several females moving into the next winter season. And at that point, I was flattered that my friend had reached out and felt that I might be a good fit on whatever level he was thinking at that time, but also very intimidated. At that point, I'd only been skiing for 3 winters, and so I felt as though the hard skills that I would be bringing to the table were suboptimal at best. And yet it was something in the back of my mind that I've always explored, maybe more in a reserved internal fashion, which doesn't really speak to my personality very well, but lacking a little bit of that outward confidence. There was still a piece of me that was very much interested in guiding, just given the activities that I pursue personally, as well as with my friends. And so I was very much intrigued by that potential opportunity, despite feeling perhaps a bit inadequate. And so nonetheless, I threw my resume out there because, as we all know, the cliche saying goes, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. And so I kind of just left it up to the universe, and I didn't hear anything for several months. And so I had kind of started to make plans to stick around Montana. And then, of course, right when you start to do those things, it kind of comes back around to shake you up a little bit. And I did hear back from them, and ultimately was hired to start the 2012-2013 winter season with Steamboat Powder Cats. And so that is what formally brought me back to Steamboat. And although that's a seasonal position, it's one that there's only 17 or 18 guides, so there's very little attrition. And when you accept a position like that, it's kind of under the presumption that you're not that you're pretty serious about wanting to be in that space. And at that point in my life, I had also been doing a bit of bopping around, quite a bit of travel. And so I was kind of ready to start to put down roots. And so in that regard, even though it was just going to be a 4 or 5 month position, I also knew I was going to have to try and figure out the other 8 months out of that calendar year. And it was most likely going to be in Steamboat. And so that brought me back, but coincidentally, at the same time, so tying this all in with NTA, one of our CSA members who worked on the farm up in Bozeman at some point in the middle of the summer season mentioned the Nutritional Therapy Association. And so this kind of speaks to the path that has kind of filtered me in the direction that I've gone in these last few years, and trying to with the intent of wanting to pursue farming on some level. That has very much reflected and mirrored a personal interest in healthy lifestyle, healthy eating. I was very fortunate to have grown up in a family that, although they don't necessarily, or at the time didn't practice by the standards that NTA's philosophy represents, it was still better than most of the standard American diets that perhaps many in society reflect today. And so there was a little bit of a baseline, and yet I also knew that there was a vast amount of room for improvement. And so when all of this interest in farming kind of began in 2007 was also when I kind of on my own just started dabbling in some of the nutrition side of things. And so when this woman in 2012 happened to mention the Nutritional Therapy Association, it really piqued my interest because it immediately fell in line with some of those internal values that I was already exploring, and it put NTA on the map. And so from that moment forward, when I moved back to Steamboat, it was always in the back of my mind, like perhaps this is the next venture to try and weave into my life. And so for, I guess it was a year and a half after returning from Steamboat, I was again just trying to figure out how to restructure my life back in Steamboat with this new, seasonal job in the winter, trying to get back on my feet outside of that. I had gone through, upon returning to Steamboat in the spring of 2013, the Master Gardener program here, which is offered, I believe, nationwide through many extension offices throughout the country. So for us here in Colorado, that's going to be through the Colorado State University Extension Office, and most towns, and particularly rural towns, are going to have an extension agent and office as a resource for their communities. And so with very little formal background in farming and agriculture from an education standpoint, as well as just having had one season of apprenticeship work, I knew that I needed to build on that in some way if I was going to try and pursue it on my own level and in my own way here in Steamboat. And so I started with that, and that was a good baseline. And more importantly, kind of like NTA, it really offered a great network to be able to access resources, and more importantly, forge relationships and connections with people in my community, which is, I think, really at the core of a lot of the work that not only NTA does, but when you're a farmer and you're involved in your food systems is very much at the center of that. And so that really helped to kind of lay the ground moving forward to then try and find a way to pursue this on my own. And being that I live in a resort town, there are definitely a handful of limiting factors and perhaps disconnects that make it a little bit more challenging to access land, in particular for beginning farmers, since there is just such a high demand for the land in these valleys, and that's just basic economics. So for several years, I kind of pursued it through a rental, like a rural rental approach, and again, just kind of continued to put those intentions out there and talk to the people that I felt would in time be able to bring other opportunities my way. And from that, I this last year was put in touch with a chef who is from Steamboat. So he went to high school here, and we had actually met 6 months prior at a beekeeping meeting. So I started keeping bees several years ago before I had any sort of farm going on. I just would build raised beds in my rentals and my rental properties. And at some point I was like, I want bees. And so I kind of had started that and was at a beekeeping meeting and I had met Patrick, and And he had said that he was looking to start a farm for his restaurant. And I remember being like, wow, that's really cool. I would love to potentially be involved with something like that. And didn't really think anything of it until 6 months later when the extension agent passed along an email that had a hiring description for a farm manager for this this venture. And so Patrick and I reconnected last spring, and the model was more or less born from him and his desire, but it brought us together with our respective areas of expertise and passion and background. And so I was hired on to start and run a small diversified vegetable farm for his restaurant that actually just recently opened within the last 5 or 6 weeks here in Steamboat. And so this has been yet just another kind of angle from this journey, this path that I've been on. Again, looking back, even though hindsight is 2020, there's no way I could have ever connected those dots in the opposite direction. And so to speak to what I'm currently doing, so I am still guiding for Steamboat Powder Cats. And so for those that are unfamiliar with what that might be, we operate on national forest land that's adjacent to the Steamboat ski area. So we are autonomous from Steamboat Ski Resort. And we operate through a special use commercial permit with the Forest Service. Steamboat Powder Cats actually has been operating on Buffalo Pass, is the area that we operate on, which is just a few miles as the crow flies from Steamboat ski area. We've been operating for about, I think it's 34 or 35 years now. So I've joined kind of the ranks of some pretty notable ski bums in that regard. And I just completed my 5th season with them. We operate with snowcats, which are kind of like big bulldozers that have tracks that can travel on snow. And so we have the ability to bring people up into national forest and ski off-piste or untracked powder. And so I get to ski pretty much all winter, which when you live in a place like Steamboat, most people are drawn here for that. Not everyone, but I definitely have had that passion born from having found this place. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share that with tourists and locals alike in the context which we do. Similarly to farming, we work long hours and many days of the week. So there definitely are trade-offs for that. I don't generally ski much for myself, and I generally don't leave the valley in the winter, which is completely fine. But nonetheless, it's not just, we go skiing every day. That's 6 of our 12 or 13-hour days. But it's great. So I'm still doing that. And I'm grateful to be able to have this dichotomy, because I feel for myself, the seasonality piece of just life, as well as the professional side of that, again, I really identify with that. And so I'm grateful to be able to kind of switch gears from winter to summer, and it fits beautifully in with the other pursuit and passion that I have in regards to the farming side of things. And so with the farming side of things, last season was when we broke ground. I actually had a handful of plans lined up in the spring prior to learning about the opportunity with Patrick. And so got kind of a late start, but we broke ground in early June last year. So this is now our 2nd season of growing out at the farm. And we more or less had just, a wide open field that we've kind of transformed in the last season, and we still have lots of growth and transformation that has yet to occur. And yet, even just comparing beginnings to ends of seasons, and then obviously from last season to this season, it's pretty amazing what we've been able to do in just a short period of time. I'd also like to speak to the fact that although we can farm here and we can grow here, and there is this, like I mentioned earlier in the video, this long-standing legacy of agricultural pursuits and ranching here in Yampa Valley, we are very much limited by our climate, more so than a lot of other places. So we live in what I guess gardeners and farmers would classify as a zone 4 climate area. And for us specifically, we average 59 frost-free days. So there's 356 days in a year, and only about 59 of them we don't see cold frost-like temperatures, which presents quite a challenge when you're looking to grow annuals, things that don't come back every year, and which are very sensitive to a lot of those temperature fluctuations, etc. Thankfully, from an elevation standpoint, we're not that much higher than Denver. We're at 6,700. And so we have some of these pros and cons that make us a very unique microclimate. And I think that's been part of my desire to want to farm here, is that there's a lot of people who think that it can't be done. And so, like many things in my life, when I'm told that I can't do something, I generally run in that direction. Same with seeking out things that generally scare me. I generally pursue them because I don't like that, there's that kind of feeling that is associated with them. And so, although it's been an intimidating process, we are having success. The restaurant was not open last year, so we broke ground and we were able to at least begin the process of starting this farm. The produce that we were able to grow and harvest was then sold to other chefs in our community just to start to get our name out. And then we expanded our size last fall, and so we this summer are now on double the space, which we are allocated up to 2 acres of space, but we're currently only utilizing perhaps just under an acre. We are organic in principle, but we are not certified. There are generally lots of hoops, and there's a lot of financial implication that you have to go through to get that seal of approval. But that being said, the small diversified approach lends itself really well to a lot of those biodynamic, organic-based principles, and we are most definitely employing those as much as possible. So we don't use any form of pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers. Everything's going to be plant-based, integrated pest management systems. We do have a small animal husbandry program, so we have chickens that we are raising for eggs, and then currently we have a small goat herd that we're raising for meat and for milk. And a lot of that kind of is evolving even as I say this right now, so it remains to be seen how it all will still come together. But we do have those things going on simultaneously with the garden space. And then we also have a small orchard that Patrick had actually started 3 summers ago. Before I had come on, he had the foresight to realize that orchards in particular take a lot of time to establish, especially in an environment such as ours, where we are as limited as we are with climate. It has never been the vision for us to grow, and operate year round. Again, that kind of fits into the model of, well, what's your location and what can you do and what can you do well in your location without necessarily expending additional resources and bleeding into some of those topics of sustainability. And so I'm grateful that Patrick and I are kind of on the same page with that in regards to working within our natural environment and doing well what we can with what we're provided, and kind of giving back in the way that we can to our community in that regard. So then to tie that into this restaurant, so the name of the restaurant and the farm, for that matter, Cloverdale Farm and Restaurant. The restaurant finally opened on July 1st of this summer, and the model for that is also pretty unique from many of the models that are out there for a farm-to-table dining experience. Patrick is formally trained in kind of a fine dining fashion. He spent the better part of the last 10 years on the West Coast, working in some fairly notable kitchens. He was the sous chef at Candless in Seattle. He was a sous chef at the Meadowood in Napa in California. And then most recently, he was the head chef at High Lonesome Ranch in DeBeck, Colorado, which is in the middle of nowhere, kind of out near the Western Slope area. And all of these restaurants are known for, their fine dining background, small plate, kind of tasting menu approach, with utilizing the utmost best local, if possible, produce to be able to highlight not only the food, but the experience of all of that. And so when he was ready to start a family with his wife, they knew that they wanted to come back to Steamboat, as both of them grew up here. And so that was a lot of his reason for wanting to try a model like this in a place like Steamboat, despite all of the hurdles and the obstacles that was probably going to warrant from both the restaurant side as well as from the farming side. And so we do supply we're a closed system in the sense that the farm doesn't supply produce to anyone other than the restaurant. And in regards to operation from a year-round standpoint, since the restaurant will obviously be open outside of the farm operation months, the goal is to be able to grow what we can during our growing season, and obviously then have as much fresh produce as possible that goes into the restaurant during that time. And then we will utilize various fermentation and canning and pickling and preservation and storage techniques to be able to then try and get us through those winter months. There's no doubt that we will have to probably supplement from other local and regional producers, but the hope is that with whatever we're able to put up, in particular during the winter months, that we'll be able to kind of let that be the focal point of many of the dishes that will still then be true to our model in that regard. So the style of Patrick's restaurant then is there's no menu. It is either a 5-course short course option, which is very much, not something that would fill you up, but would allow you to kind of just taste or experience what the Cloverdale restaurant experience is like. And then the other option would be the full chef's tasting course menu, which is anywhere from 10 to 14 courses. Again, all small plate, and a beautiful experience that I would highly recommend anyone, if they're in the Steamboat area, would need to check out. I've, even on my farmer salary, have already dined there like 3 or 4 times. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, I guess that is more or less what I'm involved in and helping to try and bring to our community. And honestly, outside of this community, the model that Patrick has brought to not just Steamboat is definitely something that we hope would to gain recognition well outside of the Yampa Valley, and we'll see where that goes, since things are obviously relatively new at this point. So with that, as I've been chatting incessantly for I don't even know how long, if there's any potential questions, I would be very much interested and open to speaking to any of those. And if not, I'm going to try not to be too awkward and continue to maybe talk. I'm not really sure. This is, like I said, a completely new format and experience for me. Okay, so Graham Reese, forgive me if I pronounced your name incorrectly, just asked, will we bring grass-fed beef into the system? So yes, however, we personally will not be responsible for the ranching side of that. We are very fortunate here in Steamboat to have a lot of other amazing local producers, and there's a lot of people who are already producing grass-fed beef, pork, lamb, what else are like your main proteins. They're doing it, and they're doing it really well. And so in that regard, especially since we are very limited from a space standpoint on our farm property, we only have the whole property is 10 acres, and yet there's other buildings and structures, and from a grazing standpoint alone, you need much more than that to be able to appropriately raise a grass-fed beef herd. And so that in particular is definitely not within our plans. The goats, like I mentioned, is something that is really hard to come by. And so that was one of the reasons Patrick initially wanted to start that for the restaurant, was because there's not really anyone doing that here. But in regards to lamb and pork, in particular, there are a handful of other amazing local producers who are also part of similar, a philosophical approach to ranching and agriculture. And so we're able to showcase their products as well. And that kind of just ties back to the fact that, again, although the farm was created to supply the restaurant, at the same time, we have no intention to try and supply it of everything that it might need. If you were to do that, we very much would not be able to, provide any sort of true diversity, because we are limited by what we can do in our season and in our climate here. And that's why a lot of those types of models you see in California and in other places in the West, or even in the East for that matter. So for us to be able to do this here locally, it's very much a community effort, and even to an extent perhaps a regional effort, and yet the focal point is still what can we do with our resources at our farm, and then we'll kind of go out from there. Natalie Jensen just asked, do you farm your own honey from your bees? Yes, we do. Again, beekeeping is fairly challenging because of our very long, cold, hard winters. And so it's a constant battle to try and overwinter your bees to get them to survive over that winter period. Thankfully, the hive, at least that I had started several years ago, it has been thriving, and I can only hope that it continues to be able to do that based on climate and disease and otherwise. For those that may or may not know, bees are a huge topic right now, just given a lot of the pesticide use of conventional agriculture, in addition to many other things. But colony collapse disorder is a word that's, or a phrase that's thrown out there, and is very, very much a real thing. And so it is definitely something that you have to, we're still exploring what that looks like from the model of having as much of a hands-off approach from a natural organic standpoint as possible, but also knowing that they are up against some significant challenges on top of our very, very cold and long winters. And so my hive thankfully did survive this winter again. Last year was the first, so this is my third summer keeping that hive. And that hive, I did not collect any honey from that first summer. I wanted to be sure that they had enough reserve going into their first winter. And so last summer was my first honey harvest from that hive. And I think I ended up harvesting about 5 gallons from just the 2 honey deeps that I had on top, well, the 2 honey boxes that I had on top of the deep. And I did split that hive actually in the spring of last year because it seemed like they were bursting at the seams and were perhaps going to swarm. And so at one point I did have 2 hives, but again, with that new hive, I didn't collect any honey from that hive. And unfortunately, that hive just was not strong enough going into last winter. And so they did not end up surviving the winter. However, my one hive is going strong, and this year I have an additional honey box on there. So I'm hoping to have an even larger honey harvest going into this fall than last. And then Patrick also had a hive. My hives are more of the traditional hive setup, which forgive me, I'm totally blanking on the name of that right now while my brain is elsewhere. Whereas Patrick's setup is more of like a horizontal hive setup, and it's called a top bar hive. And so a little bit different, a little bit more natural. The bees are gonna create their comb and their hive like they would in a more or less a sense how they would replicate it in the natural world. And so you have these wooden frames that you allow them to build their comb down from, so they don't have any like pre-made comb to build out. And what's really nice about that is you can then just go and literally just cut the comb right off the frame, and so you can leave the comb and the honey completely intact, which is beautiful. And it obviously preserves the wax, and it can have a lot of different uses. And so that is primarily what we're using at the restaurant. Unfortunately, his hive did not survive the winter either, but there is still quite a bit of honey in there that he hadn't harvested last year that we're able to carry over into the restaurant right now. And so we'll hopefully get that hive up and running again next spring. Generally, you start your hives in the spring after winter to try and give them as much of a head start for the season going into the next winter as possible. So yeah, that's the beekeeping side of things. No other questions have popped up, so I might just pause for a moment, and if anybody else has any additional thoughts or questions, I'd be happy to ask. Yes, the struggle is very real up here in a lot of sense. As I sip my kombucha in this bluebird day, life is so hard. Let's see. I guess I didn't really speak much to my involvement with NTA and being an NTP in particular. So since having gone through the NTA program, I did go through the NTP side of things. I was in the inaugural Salt Lake City course in, I guess that would have been, I think it was spring of 2015 is when I went through under John Jennis, and I had an incredible experience, as I think many NTP grads can speak to. And since then, I had the intention, so all that kind of transpired before I had taken on this this role farming. And so I was kind of putting both of those intentions out into the universe. I still was trying to find a way to farm upon graduating from the NTA program. And then I was also still very much interested in trying to start my own practice and move things along in that direction. And it just so happened that this farming piece fell into my lap, more or less. And so I couldn't quite let that opportunity pass me by. And yet at the same time, I would have been absolutely crazy to think that I could also start a practice at the same time. And so I've kind of had to hit the pause button on pursuing the nutrition side of all of this for now. Yet I don't doubt that it's something that I will do somewhere down the line in the future, just given my passion and my interest for it all and how well everything really truly integrates in with each other. And so for me to just stay involved with NTA, I've actually been a group leader in a couple of respects. So I was a group leader last year in 2016, again in Salt Lake City under Victoria Lafont. And then this year I am also group leading in Denver with Janelle and Mishabi. So trying to keep my foot in the door and keep that network and that tribe alive, and go to that headspace where and when I can. But I'd be lying if I told you I was really doing anything else with it right now. I'm barely keeping my head above water in regards to all the farm research that has to occur while also farming. So life is full, but it's also very good. Am I excited about presenting at the conference? Yes, definitely. Matt Smith actually approached me in Denver when I was there for the first workshop weekend as a group leader back in April. And I was completely blown away that he thought that I had much to share with this community or otherwise. And so I'd be, again, lying if I wasn't intimidated by that prospect. Because again, when everything starts to kind of take shape and become real, and he also played it off like it wasn't like this big deal. Like I had no idea that there was a potential for 300 people to be in that audience. I've definitely never spoken to a group of that size or in this context at all. He was kind of like, oh yeah, we're going to just have this 1-day conference. It'd be great for you to just, tell your story. And it's like, oh yeah, I can, October 21st. That sounds great. I don't have anything really going on then. And then he starts sending me these emails, and I kind of start to see that this is kind of a big deal and kind of a formalized thing. And perhaps I'm blowing that up out of proportion in my head, but then you start to see the other speaker lineup, and all of your lead instructors are speaking, and you're like, wait a second, how do I really fit into this whole group? But he's reassured me, and I have had to kind of kick my own confidence up a notch here that, I think people in general, but especially this tribe, that is the NTA community, are just grateful to hear all the little side stories that kind of are woven into this fabric of this community, and how we have a lot of overlap, and yet our differences are also really unique and awesome to share and inspirational. And so I can only hope that I'll be able to touch on that in some way or form this October amongst everybody else who's going to be talking up there about their backgrounds. So yes, very much excited. I actually am planning on creating some time and space this weekend. It's like the first weekend I've had in weeks to sit down and go into that headspace to try and get ready for that. All right, so let's see. We have a few other questions. So Graham is saying the co-op in Bozeman is amazing. Do you see more of that model expanding? That co-op is like my favorite co-op of all. Not that I've actually had the privilege of just doing a road trip from co-op to co-op, although that would be pretty cool. Yes, Bozeman's food culture and that co-op and that sense of community that has kind of sprung up there is incredible. It's one of those models that, again, that was another reason that I fell in love with Bozeman. And yet when I knew I was going to come back here, you can't help but think, like, how can this potentially be replicated elsewhere? I would love for that to happen in our own community. And yet the reality is it's fairly hard to get things like that going. That's not a reason to not pursue it. But we have a lot of factors in the Steamboat community that could or could not kind of help facilitate that. But we have a similar culture here, and we're moving in that direction. and it kind of remains to be seen how that kind of all transpires. But I'm grateful to at least have my foot in the door and be involved with the handful of people who are passionate about food issues here in Steamboat, to see how we might be able to push those goals kind of further for the benefit of our community. A couple of things that are fairly insignificant, but I'll at least speak to, that have happened in the last few years, at least for our community. It wasn't until, I guess, 3 years ago now, where we had any other option from a grocery store standpoint other than your big box chains grocery stores. And so we finally brought in a natural grocers to Steamboat. I think it was in the fall of 2013. So that's been huge, to be able to at least have something that reflects that value and that approach to food and shopping from a consumer level, to have that here as an option. We do have a farmer's market in the summer, but again, because we are so limited by our growing season up here, there are not many people growing on the scale that Cloverdale is, and obviously we're a closed model too, so we're not really participating in that from that angle. So it's definitely more of like a craft market with a few backyard vegetable growers who have maybe just some excess produce, but it's a start, and it puts things on the scene, and people talk about the fact that, like, hey, there's really no food at this farmer's market. And so, like, again, that's where a lot of that conversation is going to start. And then we have a really wonderful nonprofit organization called the Community Ag Alliance here in Steamboat, who in the last few years has been working really hard with a handful of other nonprofits and individuals to really highlight food issues. And we've been able to, in the last, I think, 2 or 3 years now, start an online marketplace, which for members, which is a very small membership fee, and again, kind of just reinforces that sense of ownership and community, allows, again, commercial or backyard producers alike, as well as value-added producers, to be able to sell their produce and their goods in an online form for weekly pickups throughout the year. Really, it's not even just for the summer months, but just whatever they have available. So all your things, from your meat and egg products, your honey, your jams and jellies, and anything else that's, again, value added, in addition to all of the bounty of the harvest during the height of our summer season, is sold there. So we're definitely making strides to move in that direction, and it remains to be seen how that all continues to unfold. All right, we're going to just see what else we've got going on. All right, so NTA just asked, group leading sounds fun. What was it like for you? I've never done anything like that, but I'm thinking of signing up. So for those that are interested in something like that, yes, I would highly recommend it. To become a group leader, you have to have already gone through the NTA training program, as an NTP, I believe. Perhaps you can be an NTC. Forgive me for not knowing the answer to that right off the bat. But having been myself gone through the NTP program, I at least know that much. And so once you've completed your education with NTA, you have that opportunity to then be involved on the leadership side of things, and kind of help facilitate your lead and your assistant instructors during those workshop weekends. Okay, so they are saying that yes, NTCs can also be group leaders. Sorry for that. And so it's similarly to when you're a student. The commitment is the same for those workshop weekends. You need to be available for those 3 to 4 days, 3 times over the course of the 9 or 10 month program. And you show up and you are kind of fully enthralled for those 3 or 4 days, and it can be mentally and physically exhausting, and yet it is also such a wonderful experience from not only the networking side, because you then end up meeting other NTPs and NTCs who are not just group leading, but they're part of the NTA kind of mission and involved in some way or form. You're obviously meeting current students and able to have a really large impact on their learning, and as a support system and an encouragement component to all of that. And so it's really been something that I've absolutely loved. And obviously you get to revisit a lot of the material that you learned as a student, which, as we all know, unless you have a photographic memory, which I certainly don't, but for those that might, I'm jealous. It's nice to revisit that, since a lot of that gets crammed in there and forgotten about, and it dust the cobwebs off and like, oh yeah, I remember this, or I know that better than I thought I did. So it serves a lot of great purposes to be a group leader, and I'd highly recommend it. All right. I'm not really sure what we're doing on time right now, because when this live event is broadcasting, it doesn't show my clock, and I hate watches. So I have no idea if we should be wrapping things up, but if there's any other additional questions out there, I'd be happy to answer them. And if nothing else, I will be in Denver on October 21st for the Fuel Adventure Summit that NTA is putting on, and I would highly recommend for those that are in the area or not. It'll be a really great day, jam-packed full of amazing speakers talking on lots of different things, but all kind of surrounding that theme of fueling adventure and integrating in the philosophy that NTA preaches. And so whether you're a student or a practitioner or completely unaffiliated, we would love for you to join us, and we really look forward to talking more with you guys then. So unless there's anything else, thank you all so very much for joining me today, and I hope that you have a great rest of your Friday and weekend ahead. Take care and all the best.